Without such dependence, there's no existence from its own side. Being a gelon, being a bhikkhu, is independent on the vows. Being a person, being a human being, is independent on the 5 aggregates. Is there anything you can say about Geshe-la that is from the side of just Geshe-la himself, without depending on something else?
그래서 가리 남샤체와 상마 때니 제와 샤다지 마도 찍라. 마때비 톤에 남샤지 제 민두나 아마 코란기 톤에 다 남샤 주민이 자로로. 다 와이나 분바이나 조시나 가리네. 코란기 톤에 다 남샤 주민이 자로로. 상마 때니나.
So if there's nothing I can posit that exists independent of something other than the self. So with regard to Geshe-la, so there's nothing I can posit saying he's such and such without depending on something else. If I can't say that, then the person cannot exist from the side of the person. There's no way of existence from the side of Geshe-la.
디나시 가스고데 다리라이들의 와 세디 철주 퉁마인 거지 도스케지 총사 제산다 단위원도 제원도 다 철주 퉁마인 만나신 와 세기 뭐부 퉁마인 거지 요하라 제사 딜라도 아니 된지기 디시나 아니 신이 디요레 공부를 디소로 풍부를 넣어서 와요 말했으디 풍부 많이 일어나 아 매바 차도래라 오늘 나 여바 차라 풍부 많이 일어나 나 여바 차오라 그래도 어머니 기지 신용데 풍부를 넣어서 와요 말에 이내 나 여래 풍부들 나를 왔을 거라 다디 포르초로제 공부를 풍부를 넣어서 와요 말했으디 풍부들 많이 일어나 나 매바 차랬어 제가 딜을 고주 가도 그래서 마스디 코로나 퉁마인 거지 뭐지 먼저로 차단시도 풍부화랑 아이나 아니 마 퉁마인 거디 명령 차로다 다 풍부를 마스 민다고 싸우는 마도 다 배는 갈라고 그래 조시스 다 인지기 지지심을 다 제벌스라 그 민자와마도 민자와마도 다가라로 그 디나신 풍부들 마스라마도 그 퉁마인 거지 명령 차로 디면은 나네요 차도다
So, likewise, Geshe-la gave another explanation. When the eye appears, the way it appears to us, it appears by way of being a unique object. It's something that exists as unique in a way that it's not merely existing through the power of convention. So therefore, Nagarjuna has said that usually, well, what we would say is, Nagarjuna basically said that if the self doesn't exist as separate from the aggregates, if the self were the aggregates, then it couldn't exist. So what does this mean? Geshe-la explained what this means. This means that usually we say, so the person does not exist as separate from the aggregates. So the only other possibility for it to exist would be to exist as being the aggregates. But that would mean it doesn't exist at all, because that would mean it does not exist uniquely. Because the way it appears to our mind is by way of existing uniquely. So uniquely as in like being something unique to the 5 aggregates. So therefore, if it has to be unique, then saying it is the 5 aggregates, it's just words. It's not really what we mean when we say the I, because the sense of a uniqueness there that is not really that. So likewise with the table, Geshe-la saying that's the only English word I know, table. So, and you used it. And so if I were to say the table is that, if it's that object here, then there would be no uniqueness of the table. The table would not exist in that unique fashion. It would just be that. And so that uniquely appearing table just wouldn't be there. So there wouldn't be a table.
답변은 가와다부디 기시 가와디 대이나 가와디 가와마 힘이 차도라 가와디 대이나 가와디 대이나 졸라이나 가와디 가와마 힘이 차도라 가와디 가위 된시 두마로 디지디 다 가와레 너디 졸라마 힘버지 고딱다 디 조고도 졸라마 힘이 뭐 조고도 세 퉁마 힘벌라디 다 변에 찍으셔는 뒤로 가와레 시과로 퉁마 힘이 뭐지 뭔지 제용도 졸라마 힘버디 딱다 조고도 그런 거 조지마 힘바 디마 힘버지 코라마 힘이 최신다 탐지기 동바 그런 퉁마 힘이 뭐 가와 너디네 과 퉁마 힘이 뭐지인데 디조고도 하스 디지디 아니 가와 레디 아니 저라도 지구지경이나 가와 샤투입니다. 딜레드 전에 코로나다 민자위 최신의 망부주 요 인자 아니 신의 가와 세대 통문이 뭐 차죠. 코로나다 민자위 미팅 스월다 민자위 최신다지 균이면은 안 가와 세대 통문이 뭐 되도입니다. 통문이 뭐 말에나 가와 믿어. 제선 딜레드 코로나의 신비 최디게 되면은 가와 매봐. 가와 여바디 코로나의 신비 최도 되더니 취 코로나의 신비 취 상만의 폐지를 다 되더니 된디기지 시에바이나 가와디 전라들을 되스 나당지 유되니 제가 가와 분발을 되스는 상당세지 유되니
So, for example, when we say, for example, the pillar this bag? You can like lift it up his bag. So we cannot say that the pillar is the bag. So if it was the bag, then it would not be a unique kind of phenomenon. It would not be something unique. So it has to be something unique. It has to be something other than the bag. So therefore, for something to be unique, we have to say that it's everything other than itself. We have to say that we have to deny, we have to refute that it is everything that is not itself. So in order for that to be that unique object, if we don't do that, then it would be the same as the bag. We cannot posit it. So therefore, being none of those things that are not the bag, that are not the pillar, being none of those things that are not the pillar, that would mean you have a unique pillar. That would mean that uniqueness. So therefore the pillar cannot be anything other than itself, because there would be no way in which it is unique. So therefore the table is different from everything other than itself. Therefore we can say that if these phenomena that are other than the pillar were not to exist, the pillar cannot exist. Why? Because the pillar exists on all those other phenomena. It exists on all other phenomena that are not itself, because it exists for it being different from all these other phenomena on those phenomena. 那这也是前几天的课程当中，我们强调说，平的存在必须观待住。我们说这其中有个理可值得理解的之处，到底就是可能就在这个地方。就是최신 디게 되면은 가와스는 통문 이버드메, 가와스는 통문 이버드메나 가와메. 이 주디 그것도 수지 요청으로. So therefore, if these other phenomena were not there, then there would not be a unique pillar. If there were no unique pillar, there would not be a pillar.
그래서 단다 돈인 참고하는 게 좀 아쉬워서 라베콘의 기지시나 대 기지는 최 인지미지라고 해야 말해. 대단 들어가 됩니다. 다 친구 충중 시도다 그때는 차주다. 때는 차주와 인정 아니 갈라고 그랬다. 강에 되고 있는 강에 겨져 제주구주 유행지래 아니 유행지래 아디 갈라다 겨져라는 말이다. 특히 강에 지중지에나 봐. 다 겨져 유행지래 아니 미지기 상단 기타 충중의 선 선로 거당지의 유용성이 뒤에 뒤걸 하고는 제말이다. 양 다가랑다 강에 다가랑다 아니 미지가 아부가 친구 쉬어도 선로 거당지의 유용성이 지다 강에 침배 두시기 충중 두시기 문제기 대세대적의 인디 문제 선로 당초던 들어와요 봐마도 코란기 문에 이 친구들이 뒤 충중에서 타지도 지에는다.
So this is something that is just in terms of understanding emptiness, it's just a kind of an auxiliary kind of topic here, talking about being big or small in relation to something else. It's just kind of, we take it from there and go in that kind of direction here. So we say, for example, we have a problem. The problem is kind of a 90% kind of problem. So again, I was then saying, well, let's assume, let's imagine we could actually measure it in terms of percentage. So there's a 100% kind of problem, and if one has a 90% kind of problem, independent or in relation to that 100%, one may think, oh, that's really small. That's really a small problem. So in relation to a greater problem, when they're who thinks, oh, this is a small problem, and that is a valid cognition, thinking it is smaller in relation to something else. Therefore, it is actually a valid cognition, one actually is in accordance with reality. Likewise, if one thinks of a smaller problem, of a smaller percentage, and looks at one's own problem, which is 90%, one may perceive that as a really big problem. So here, big and small problems, we can think along those lines, but from the side of the object itself, there is no big problem, there is no small problem.
기지 데이터 미사메신 대지로 왔어. 라나 라레 모멘간 리용디 지다신 대에 조지들의 신대 오지래. 이내 라레 모멘간 리용디 마신이 뭐 용대이다. 가신 나지 기능고 나 로숨시 되네 나용디 엔투용디 다만 만난 신 두분양이 되는 잠불링을 요마레스 그거도 띵모이네스 말아. 매바마세 딘디기 섬당다 충중디 땅마투 버려. 신 딜레 네 강에 채워 여버도서 달람사 삼로 커마토네 삼로 땅 아니 뉴스 년고도 TV 따고도 메가 자타 메가도 저도 저고도 무슨 저다 아니 삼당나 아따 네디다 충중을 샤서 버지 텐토그로
So you may think, well, everyone knows that. We all know that. This is not. There's no news to us. This idea is not new to us. But when it comes to putting it into practice, we're unable to really put it into practice. So let's say, for example, a person who's sick for 3 or 4 years. So then when you meet that person, they may tell you, no one suffers like myself. No one has that many problems. I have the greatest problems there are. This is really what this person feels. But that's actually not true. It's actually not true. Of course there are people with greater problems. There are problems, people who suffer much more. All you have to do is watch TV, go to hospital, go around and see people with much greater problems. So therefore, this is actually a smaller problem in relation to some greater problem. So you can see on the TV or on the news, you can see people with greater problems. So it's easy to think along those lines, to understand this, but to really put it into practice, to really take it to a deeper level, that's much more difficult. So for example, with regard to arrogance, when you study the scriptures, when you study the scriptures in the traditional way, when you study, for example, science and reasoning, which is only the third topic, and then afterwards you start the Perfection of Wisdom Sutra. So when you've just started that, there's an arrogance growing. Oh, I've already really advanced. But actually that's nothing. You're really still at the beginning. If you look at all the other topics that you still need to study, this is nothing. So therefore, this kind of arrogance arises, not being able to see in relation to something else that this is not something that's amazing. And those are the afflictions. This is because of afflictions. Afflictions are not able to take into consideration all these aspects. So, actually, when you study Tare or science and reasoning, there's a feeling, oh, now I really know philosophy, I know how to debate. But actually, you don't really know that much. If then you study the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras, and then about those the text in Maitreya, the 4th chapter of that, then you really advance. And when you come there, you think, I don't know anything, because then you compare it, you understand how much there's to know, how little you actually know, and then you really feel like, I really don't know the scriptures.
수수기 교인은 친구인의 충중토에 미신다인의 친구인의 충중토에 수수인의 충중인의 친구토에 정보도 믿어. 선다코티 테스트 디디컬 전시된 투나 아니 셴바르마다 칸을 레베다 레나부터.
So it's really important to remember these ideas because with regard to another person, if there's a small fault, we see this as really big. If the same fault is our fault, we see it as very small. If another person has some great quality, we see that as just a small quality. Or any quality we see as small. If we have a quality, we see as really big. So really, like, this is not really what is there. So again, as they were saying, we should develop that mindfulness. We should develop this mindfulness of this relativity as described before.
제가 되주비 신등인 지기 대슬로를 유행된 지기 강해지체 딘디지를 할래 갈 변하다 주구디 체조에 강해지체는 라반의 체가 아마 딘디지를 갈 할래요 그래서 셈을게 연구해서만 라바 체는 신이식 말은 딘디지를 가려야 되는데 셈을야 강해마 체딩이지 되면 땅에 라바 체스 라바 차상거래 체로도 스타일 시우제 조금 뺏고 걸쳐서를 그러는데 친구 시우지 제가 셈기 마이기 셈라에 남다 레말레세디 삼도당초 디차로도 되주도 그 되주인데 랑면은 주베지 연아 아니 싫어 삼다에 계제 여마라다 그러는 땡케서디.
So therefore, if one knows relativity, if one is familiar with this kind of relativity in the sense that phenomena exist in dependence on something else and they're just relative, then one is able to deal with forms much better. So when one's finger is broken, let's say when one breaks the bone in one's finger, one thinks, oh great, I didn't break my hand. And if one breaks one's hand, one thinks, well, at least I didn't die. So one thinks of something worse than that and is able to cope with it. On the other hand, one may think, oh my god, my entire hand is broken. Oh my god, my entire finger is broken. So that kind of desperation because one is unable to see that in relation to something else is not that bad. So therefore, seeing a phenomena established in relation, in dependence on something else, one is able to deal with problems much better. If phenomena were not to exist independent on something else, if they existed by way of their own nature, there would be no way to actually think along those lines and not be desperate with regard to a problem like that.
지나시 리딩 기침부터 주디 다 바기 심편시에 다 되는데라 소리는 기침부터 주디 다 리딩 디 제발에 때네 아니 강을 갸타바 똥타바 치타바 용내 용 당원이네 심리 도스 키셔디 아니 강이 뭐 주주주 디발레나 철거 거래 용을 강이 딘디기 센터디 니에 또 망스파 마제나 아니 강이 니슈숨 줄레 용내 강이 시부질레 나와 차대야지 강이 자용내요 똥용내요 봉용내요 삼바지 답변은 백이 다 저디 전주센바를 찾는 소로가 전주센바에는 신변직인 스타직도 신변 주빈 디체비 디경기 안 나네나 신내시 아니 녀손의 전에 조세야 저보다 친구 등질을 찾는 생기 갸디 깨셔디 제만강의 춘주체디 철거 거래요만 원하는 강의 철거요만 뒤로 고치 전지슬레이다 진짜 당분이 있으면 자기에 오랬어.
So when we talk about engaging in an important activity and having to do some important work, for example, benefiting others, when engaging in the work of benefiting others, if one, before one engages in those work, in that kind of activity, in that work of benefiting others, one thinks whatever problem arises, whether there's going to be 1,000 or 10,000 problems, never mind. One's determination is not removed, it's not eradicated in that moment. So then when 50 problems arise, one is totally prepared for that. But without having that kind of determination, ahead of that activity, 20 problems, 30 problems arise, one is totally desperate. So therefore, before one engages into any kind of meaningful activity, one thinks whether it's 100 problems, whether it's 1,000 problems, whether there are 100,000 problems, never mind. So like a bodhisattva, for example, a bodhisattva works for the benefit of all sentient beings. So with that determination, no matter what happens, whether I get sick, whether I die, whether I go to the lower realms, it doesn't matter. I work for the benefit of all sentient beings. So then, when small problems arise with that kind of determination that has been has arisen right from the beginning, then when small problems arise, they're not discouraged. So this kind of enthusiasm is called the enthusiasm of protection. It's a kind of protective enthusiasm. No, Armalite enthusiasm. This enthusiasm is called Armalite enthusiasm. Do you have any questions? Any questions?
Kisanga di mitaba kola kita sebenarnya gyungi kola. Ani yang di kesi pernah coba tahu Cina, coba di casi lele gyungi tu, ani mutu ne gyungi tu, ani magurbe justru mido, ani magurbe caya mido ra, ani tadi nak ciki na orang yang pe mampu gyungi ra. Ini sih ngaco disani, cuyo na, ani ngaco tatung, coba di ngot simpe kau sendi kali ni nam, tidak.
Tapi kalau ni ngamak mana cima main baca jadi, ngamak tu ngosin kerjas.
So Martha's question was with regard to impermanence. So she was asking about impermanence, especially Geshe-la yesterday or previously spoke about the continuum of something, how it is continuously changing. And so the question is, let's say the table, when the table changes moment by moment, it really means that the parts of the table, each part changes continuously. There's nothing that remains even for one moment the same. So if everything always changes in every moment, how are we able to still identify the table the next day, even though it's totally different? That's totally changed.
That the training ngoshien di ane ngama da chima tanzingi chere se kiji yusar yorwe midi tire se ngoshien jora tanzing da tro yorwe
So Geshe-la says, I'm not really sure. I seem to remember something that the fact that we recognize something has something to do with the apprehension that a former moment of something and a later moment of something are the same. So it's a grasping onto permanence, kind of grasping onto permanence in the sense of perceiving a former moment and a later moment as identical.
That's it. Gundi yorwa. And Gundi luegi taba ready in a yuba chadiyora taba. Chesanta Gundi yuba chi kanda and ngama the chima the tabu yo inza and kotire si somebody get to be.
But leaving aside that kind of explanation with regard to grasping onto permanence, in actuality, there's a continuum of something which is imputed by the mind. And since the former moment and the latter moment are similar, we'll be able to recognize it. We're able to recognize the same object.
Diletita Kaldaur Chibareta, Nachila Chana, Kiji ready Chashiche, and Quinty Chokola. That two Dunyan the Chana, and Sugar ready Chashiche, and two Chobas, the Chobas, the Lagora. Diletiti Reva di Mato, and Chobas age Mindu, say Kiji Shetanshitoa, ready Mato, Choba Mindus. And Dilatizane, any di goju dila rewa dili losu mo tadili en chobaji mindu senu gojo na tada tigora di mato rewa di mato shinda choba seji mindu la di choba meba la gojo na ta dila di ane dile ko chashi di mato mindu chashi di mato mindu la di ta duli chame mato shinda kyuni meba charura duli chame mato chaza meba chana monzu nyungwa na kigido duli chame ki Java Chetuku Marva, Pagi Yongsurki. And then I am in the Chayamindo, and the Sabralayamindu, Trayamindo, Teamindo, Ladu, Yuan and Ketudu. That Pagi Kalavareta, me lamnan matri tingi ya lugini mata bithone kijishi matungi pagi lu mata bithone kijishi na chamedi yuna lu mata bi kijishi yore mato hodi kala rejewa di mato ta choba di midu ladi choba di lu ta bi suru rejewa di lu mata bi esuru chargido ya dile ko chashi yodi chashi di mato ya chupshi di midu ladi ya chupshi di lu ta bi suru di chashi shi di lu mata bi suru ya chashi diye ta baba de jodi 다 둘이 참여돼 마도 신다 상물로 다시 줘지 이내 매일은 균이 맞지 등이지 또 유매기 톤의 유대행이 뢰다 등이 니 소지 다 키만에는 직접 매등이지 유매기 톤 뢰다가 뭐 이내 지금도 매내 지금도 진짜 뢰다비 시제지도 마샤랑 샤르다
So, saying that, well, for example, each moment, when we say each moment and then all the continuum of each moment, we come to that collection. So we come to a collection of parts. So for example, Geshe-la showed his notepad. He lifted up his notepad and showed his notepad, and he was saying, each page here, when we say a collection of parts, there is no collection that can be found separate from those parts. So when we say no collection of parts of this notepad can be found without those parts, each of those parts, when you're saying that, what is the meaning? Well, from the point of view of saying there's nothing separate, there's no collection separate from each of these parts, well, yeah, there's one way of looking at it. But another way is that there's nothing there really except these different parts. So if we say there's nothing there except for these parts, so it cannot be found, there's nothing there really, well, that's also difficult because that is contradictory to our own experience. So therefore, we cannot really say, I'm here, I'm not there, I get sick, I do not get sick, I'm staying, I'm not staying. It's very difficult. So it's not okay to say nothing exists there. So we have to say it is just imputed. So saying it's not imputed would also not be alright. So the point is here is like, when I say each of the parts are not the collection, so I do not find a collection. So I say that it's merely imputed, and so therefore there's a collection. And then I go deeper. I take the parts of each of the parts, and I go and I keep looking for something there, and actually I do not find anything there. So I do not find anything there. And if I wanted to find something, the only choice I have is saying there's a partless particle, because that cannot be further divided. So to have a partless particle, so therefore we have to say that the collection is just merely imputed. It is imputed on the basis of its parts. And so then when we go smaller and smaller and smaller, we just say it is continuously imputed. If in the end, so therefore we need to say it's both. We need to say it exists, but it is merely imputed. There's no other way than just saying that.
Tatana motion machine kijishi on the motion di mare la di tobagi la do semki shebegi ta yi shebegi di ju yi shebegi su dom je do ro ta pena de kusho de zo sin ya dom chi ja do ya di gan dile manji de yuen gi mi di dis ya dom chi ja de ja tan shi do ko dom ka wa ja ja de to ba ko ra ra ta ani pomo di ge dis ya dom chi ja tan ki do an darum sala mi di ge dis ya dom nya be 자가르 미디게디 점불링 미디게디스 코토베기 돔 갸헤디 디르와 딜레디 니 기지마 보여바 이네 기지디 수돔 엔티조지 디레세 토베기 딜라이도 이네 토버세데라 미시기 디돔 갸토가 아이 제산타 베나 가장 규슈르 차레 아니 토베기 가장기 추디 디레스 가장 추디에 로르샤 다링디에샤 두진 추트몬도 돔지 갸다시도 이내 미시기 가산추 다가는 통버레베 가산추디 가는 통에디 가사르와 단다 통에디 추로가르 딘냠도 덤제 또버기 마도 미시기 덤제 마르 딜레디 미시기 가산기 추디 통버레베라나 안테스 요저도 다 디메나 아니 다디 조지디 기지리 가르디 미시기 기지리 가르디 미시 담보디 조지 담보 미시니버디 조지 니버도 스트로샤르 마도 수 참은 수 팀모도 dom전에 통대의 미시지 매베스르지.
So therefore, here we say we identify something. So to be able to identify something or not, the mind that is able to do that is the conceptual consciousness. It is the mental consciousness. So what that consciousness does, it always adds things together. It kind of puts them together. It adds them together. So for example, those are the people here. These are people. So it adds many things together. That's a vase, so vases. So it takes vases as like adding them together. Indians, as like putting many Indians together. People of this world. So it always adds many things together. It adds something together. The sense consciousness doesn't do that. It doesn't add things together. It doesn't add anything. Which is why it's kind of difficult to say that our eye consciousness will perceive yesterday's water or yesterday's river to be today's river. So for the eye consciousness, it doesn't do that. It doesn't perceive many, many moments as just one. So this is what the mental consciousness does. So here really when you look at the table, you divide it into different parts, you divide it into different moments. The eye consciousness perceives it just as that. But it's the mental consciousness that adds things up. It kind of goes all these parts together, table, all those moments together, consciousness, etc. So it adds these moments together, it kind of puts them together. 可不可以把前前后后的唱法把它统一起来呢？是不是不能这样子？另外一个问题。
So I have a question concerning the argument that because the self has to be either the aggregates or has to be something separate from the aggregates. And because it is neither the aggregates nor anything separate from the aggregates that exist. Now, I was wondering, couldn't we see that there are some phenomena which are neither the aggregates nor separate from the aggregates? For example, if I have a car, we can say that sure, the car is nothing more than the aggregates. But when the car is moving and it acquires speed, couldn't we say that the speed is neither the aggregates nor is it separate from the aggregates? It is something which emerges over time from the behavior of the aggregates. So for example, when the car hits a tree, the tree only touches some of the aggregates, but it also touches the whole speed, or it affects the whole speed of the car. So the question is, why couldn't we see I-ness also as this kind of a phenomena which emerges over time from the behavior of the aggregates?
단다 그런 간지시에 가지나
다디 공부 이인다 많이 있어. 간다 공부 레지야 많이 공부 유튜브야 많이 공부 녹수야
매바디기 오세우다 차라스
이나야 이 카노 마이나
매고야디 어디 세우라는 민도 가르스나 디니 카야 마이다 이 카야 마이 바이나 유츠시 샤토 민도에
그럼 빼 가르치 얘기를
스나라 배나 모타도이나 지나 모타디 랑기 차시 레레야 마이 초바야 마이 디나 녹수야 매 이나야 모타 두디 참발라 격세시여라 격세시여라 아니 격세디 아니 모타기 차시야 마이 모타기 차시 초바야 마이 녹수야 마이 이네 여다 된데 여라고 그랬어 아니 하바두지 격부두디 참발라야 지 신돈다발라 답도 참발라 다 답사디기 다 차시 레주다 답도 말해 이나야 격세디기 딱딱 가두라 모타기 격세디 격부두디 참발라다 호텔칼라시 신동도를 땀나 안디 가서 격제 매바 차리라 sonsan 두신의 상단하다 격제리 로스도 쉬어요다 다 자신의 다 리르는 많이 저거야 많이 로스야 많이 나야 단호 격제도 요 onda 디신의 다 단다 격제디 모자니 총어라 자신의 총어래 로스야 많이 지가야 많이 바야다 자신의 많이 바야면 요는 요라고 그랬어 다 된듯이 이나마 다디 안에 지금 공부기 차시야 많이 안에 저거야 많이 로스야 많이 이제 공부라지 중화지 여츠지 샤통인데
산다디 된지다 거래. 풍부디 나이 차시를 샤. 다기 차시를 샤. 진짜 마세디 마 코랑기 차시를 레와디 마히. 델리 로스의 민도나 마디메바 타셔를 마도 아니 데디 풍부디게 마히. 델리 로스의 민도나 데메바 타셔다 용도. 디나신 쪽체세디 모저던 쪽신이디 찍버샤기에나 아니 모저기 차시를 레와디 마히. 델레신도 매바이나 모저 매바 타치바나 이 교체데 매바 타치루가 교체세에데 모저마 인인지나 제사디 모저가나 제 민두레디 교체레 민두레나 디 카가 디 조다카라 카가 차디고.
So Geshe-la's response, can you hear me? Geshe-la's response is that we say the self, when we look for the self, we look for something that is either its own parts, so its own aggregates, or the collection of those aggregates, or separate from those aggregates. So it's looking at the parts of the object we're looking for, and then decide it's not there if it doesn't exist in the way just described. So, therefore, with regard to the car, for example, the car and its speed are not the same. If the car and the speed were the same, when you look for the parts of the car, or the collection of the part, or something separate, and you do not find the car, if then you do not find the speed, that's okay, because they're the same, if they were the same, if the car and the speed were the same. But the car and the speed are not the same. When you cannot find the speed, if you cannot find the car by way of looking at the parts, that doesn't mean that something else cannot exist. So Geshe-la explained that if you look for an object, if you look for the self, and you do not find the self as separate from the aggregates, it doesn't mean the notepad cannot exist. So something else can still exist, because you've just been looking for the self among its parts. So likewise with respect to the car, if you look just among the parts of the car and you do not find the car, it doesn't mean the speed is not there. The speed is a different object, it's not identical to the car. Therefore, in order to determine whether the speed is there or not, you have to look at the parts of the speed. You have to look at the parts that the speed is made of, and then find, and then look, does the speed exist as being one of the parts of the speed, as the collection of the parts, or exist separate from the parts?
딜레디 당연히 알레 교체다디 라베 답데 보지도디 셈도 세우지 차이면도 교체세지 다 간지질을 나버려 교체세디 다 니버도 보지 나와이나 그러 다 간다리야 교체디 모저다 카가레 에치버레스 디워디로다 다 교체디 모저다 치버이나 교체다 모저디 수술치에 요리 요마레 수술치에 유에나 교체디 모델 로가 차죠. 엔티나신 다디 풍부디 로가 차죠. 수술치에 민두나 안에 다가는 교체선의 모델선의 교체를 풍부 다 차죠. 지디디 교체다 모델세디 수술치에 유에 요마레 있으나 다 딜 렌 가르자고 야나면은 지웠다 초마레 야나면은 딜렌 개 요마레 그러
So, actually it's kind of easy to just say speed. But what is speed actually? So Geshe-la is asking, what do you actually mean with speed? It's kind of difficult to really say what it is. Is it some kind of force, some kind of potential? So, does it exist as separate from the car? Is it like totally unrelated to the car? Is it the same as the car? Right? So we can make that kind of distinction. So we can is it like totally separate, like totally unrelated? So if you have one, you don't have the other, or is it exactly the same? So is it exactly the same? So if you have one, you must have the other. So we need to investigate that. So what is it? Is in the same way as we say, are the aggregates the self? Are the aggregates the self or not? Is that kind of investigation? So we need to ask this question. So can we ask this question? So what would you say to that? Or is it not allowed to ask that question? Or is there no answer? Yes, go ahead.
Well, I definitely don't know what speed is metaphysically, but I would just maybe recite what I said in the question. So I would say that the best way probably to see speed of the car would be as a phenomenon which emerges over time from the behavior of the aggregates of the car. So the speed of the car is a phenomenon which emerges over time from the behavior of the aggregates of the car.
Behavior means function, due to the function of the aggregates.
Yes, yes. And hence it is something which is neither the aggregates of the car nor something separate.
It is neither one of the aggregates, one of the parts of the car, but it's also not separate.
Sorry, the sound is rotating. I cannot hear you now.
Oh,
I think it's because my mic was.
sorry. Are you saying it's separate from the? It's not one of the parts, and it's not one of the parts of the car, but it's also not separate.
Yes.
단다코나 콘슈여디 가르스나 타치 세리베단 제네 아니 격제 가리임에 코라야나 토문도 이나양 격제라야디 타코 미기 통토 그래서 격제디 가르레스라와이나 아니 가서 모터기 차셰디기 차와체바 델라 데네 아니 칼로다 키지키지기 칼로다 칼레 클치 충격적이 처지레스 나름바 제니야 충격이 처지레스 나다고 디소다 칼 격제라야디 아니 림기 단다 가서 모터기 차셰라 데네 총에 림기 총에 아니 체지레스 다 격제시레스 아니 덴드비 격제디 가르스나 모터기 차셰다 치야마이 타디야마이 가야마이 단다고 격제세디 가리가리 그런 낸디데
제가 다 지금만이 다대만이 쓰디 격세디 처진의 관한 격세 지시자 투문들라서 이내 모두 지시자 투그러 버려 이내 디카가 켜세 민들라는 반드시다 기본 관한 기체에서 모두 지시자 투고 격세 지시자 투고 말
지금 다들 고치도. Geshina's response is, so you're saying you cannot really explain what is speed. You can explain the car very clearly, and you can decide that the car and the speed are neither one nor different. So that's a little difficult, because if you can't really explain the speed correctly, how can you decide that it's different or one with the car? I mean, not different and not one with the car. Not different from and one with the car. How can you decide that?
I'm inquiring. I think the main thought experiment here is that if the car crashes into, say, a pole, the pole touches only some aggregates of the car, but it does, so not all the aggregates. However, it does seem to touch the whole phenomenon, which is the speed of the car, because the car stops when hitting the pole. And so there seems to be some sort of a distinction between the phenomenon, which is the speed of the car, and the car itself. However, it cannot be totally separate from the car either.
Okay, let me just check, to double check. You're saying that because the car, when it crashes, not each part is affected by the crash, so therefore the speed is not identical with the car?
Yes.
Okay. And you're saying that because when the car stops, the speed stops, therefore it's also not unrelated?
Yes.
단다고 세야디 가르스나 따고 단다 격제 가리임에 고양 게 무트네 삼땅고레 이나양 단다고 디레 가르사 모터 데다 아니 격제니 직단 다데 가야 많이 마셔베 김생 가르스나 직 많이 김생 가르스나 아니 모터 답도 참발라 모터기 차시 리르 답고요 말에 정말 돌아 도고야 말에 직 많이 김생 격제다 모터니 직 많이 김생 모터 당 격제니 다데 많이 김생 가르스나 아니 가르사 모터 답도 참발라 모터 호텔가 돌아 도도나 격제디야 메버 잘 정상 금슨티 제네양 대화 여바 소리다 디니 대화 여바 아니 세우도 금슨티 제네양 코 다들 많이 봐. 다 코니 그 격서 고마 주네야. 지금 다들 많이 굉장히 고마셔야 돼.
디니 레도. 나서 차랑이라. 디니 레.
Did you say the two? Did you say, I forget whether you said the two, the speed and the car. Did you say the two? The speed and the car?